So, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us to our discussion today on influencing without management authority as a senior individual contributor. That's a long topic, but hopefully it's also an interesting one. And so this webinar will last about 45 minutes, and after which all of us are going to head over to the Lead Dev Slack to answer your questions. So please join us there to ask questions afterwards. We're also going to try to take some questions live, so you can use the Q&A feature in Zoom to submit your questions, and we will try to get to those towards the end. We'll see how that goes. And so let's get started with some introductions. I can start. My name is Matt Hawthorne. I'm a senior principal engineer at Comcast, where I focus mostly on improving the architecture of messaging systems that drive our customer engagement. Paulina, do you want to introduce yourself next?
Sure. I'm currently a staff software engineer at Squarespace. I work in the data group, building and maintaining pipelines that help democratize our data in a safe and scalable way.
Nelson?
Yeah, my name is Nelson. I'm a software engineer. I'm currently at a ML research group called Anthropic. I think my experience most directly relevant to this topic will come from, I spent 7 years as an engineer at Stripe working on infrastructure and developer tooling all over the place.
Diana?
Hi, I'm Diana. I'm a staff software engineer at Slack. And in general, I have experience with building distributed systems and focusing on large-scale application, mostly with a focus on the data platform side. I've been at Slack for almost 6 years, and I joined as one of the founding members there, and I had of the data engineering team, and I had the opportunity to build and grow that team from the ground up. And most recently, in the last year, I joined Slack customer protection team under the security org, where we're focusing and using data to make Slack more secure for our users.
And last but not least, Bert, go for it.
Hi, I'm Bert. I'm a senior staff engineer at Slack, working on the platform team. And I think a lot about how people can build apps and integrations on top of Slack. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Okay. So thanks for introducing yourself, everyone. So we have a bunch of questions we put together that we thought help us best explore this topic. So let's get into them, shall we? So first question, I'm curious, what does having influence without authority mean to all of you? And also, what are some of the things that you use it for in your day-to-day work? And it doesn't have to just be technical stuff. It can be, cultural improvements, process improvements, whatever comes to mind for you. Go ahead, Diana. I think you're on mute.
Of course I am. Hi. So for me, like influencing without authority, just one area of it means convincing others and getting buy-in when you're not in a position of power and authority. And like maybe some of the concrete examples that I usually do on my day-to-day basis are basically getting buy-in from leadership or peers when we want certain projects founded or get prioritized. And when I'm not thinking about the technical side of things, I think influencing the direction and the vision of the team or where we want to go long-term is another aspect. And also you can influence on the product direction, also helping on the management side. So another thing that's usually very important and dear to me is being an ally for other engineers. Like once you have built more trust in the environment you're in, you can influence the leadership to help maybe other people grow, bring in visibility to them. Kind of you are in the room where it happens, so you can bring other people there too.
Go ahead, Nelson.
Yeah, I think one thing I heard mentioned there a little that I think a lot about is having a sort of prioritization of an organization or a team in some level ends up measured by your staffing decisions, like which teams get funded, which teams have people working on them, what are people working on. And so one broad area of influence without authority is sort of finding some way to turn your beliefs about what the organization should be working on, what systems need to be built, what systems need to be improved, into projects that actual humans are working on, even though you have no official authority over team assignments or potentially the organizational prioritization mechanism. And that can come, I think, from both sort of a bottom up and top down approach of either you can find individual engineers and get them really excited about whatever project or vision you have, but it also comes from having relationships and trust with the management teams and managers and whoever sort of runs your organization's actual prioritization and staffing decisions, so that you can have soft influence there about setting priorities, encouraging the creation of teams or the focus of teams.
Anyone? Oh, Paulina, go ahead.
I totally agree with everything that was said, but to add a little bit more to Nelson's answer, some of the ways I found to do some of that top-down stuff is through strategy writing and getting into our OKR setting process. So kind of getting in at the beginning and kind of aligning the vision and the strategy and turning that into outcomes that we can agree on, as well as, influencing via like RFCs and other cultural processes.
Cool. Okay, let's move on to the next question. I've seen two extreme versions of influence, and neither of them were good, in my opinion. One is when nobody trusts your opinion. So effectively, your job title might suggest that you should have influence, but in practice, you don't have any. The other is when everyone trusts your opinion so much that they just wait for you to tell them what to do. I'm curious, have any of you experienced either of these extremes? And also, how do you find the right balance between them?
Sorry, I don't know if you called on me.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm having a BBC News moment. Okay. So like, I would say I've experienced both of these. And I think the first one is that if no one trusts your opinion, it's probably because you haven't proven yourself to them, or you've built their trust up. And I think an example of this is when you're reviewing tech specs. Like when you reach a certain level of seniority, you are asked to review tech specs all the time. But you've got a million things going on, and you're maybe tempted to skim it, and give your gut reaction on certain things. I'm guilty of that as well. But I think you have to be cognizant that it erodes people's trust in you if you're not putting in the effort. Engineers spend hours or days writing tech specs, and if you don't have time to properly review it, you should probably just refuse to review it, because if you can't dedicate yourself to it. When I was a junior engineer, I used to go in these reviews all the time. Sometimes they called like senior tech councils, and you would present to a bunch of people and they would ask you questions like, did you think of X? And you'd say, yeah, I thought of X, or no, I have to think about that more, or what's X, And there's nothing inherently wrong with that interaction, but I think there's nuance in how you have that conversation. Like if you're being a jerk about it, like people react to that. And junior engineers, they interact with the person of seniority like once a year. And that's becomes the impression they have of you. That's how they talk about you, And for the other extreme, the flip side of it, of people wanting you to make decisions or sign off on everything, the way you fix that, I think, is again about trust. It's this time it's about you telling other engineers that you have trust in them and have faith in their technical decisions. One thing I've been thinking about the last few years is what I think and say when internally I'm thinking I wouldn't have made that design choice. And many times you just have to let go and let people go their own way. And sometimes they'll make mistakes, and sometimes they'll surprise you. Yeah, my thoughts on that.
Go ahead, Paulina.
I've also experienced both of these extremes throughout my career. I think I experienced the first one earlier in my career, and where there wasn't really a lot of trust and I didn't really have a title. And this is one of those things where I think titles really do matter a lot. It depends on your experience and the culture of the company and the size of the company, everything else. I think in a smaller company, you can kind of go in and start influencing. And I think at a larger company, it's harder without a title. But you end up spending a lot of time trying to convince people, and it gets really frustrating, especially if in the long term, they realize you were right all along and you could have saved all this time. And if that happens multiple times and you still haven't gotten that trust, it starts to feel really bad and it makes you feel really insecure. So, make alliances, I think somebody once said, push through friction. Try to see why people don't trust you, or why they're making you spend all that time convincing them that they should trust you, or find a different job if it's not working and you've tried all those things. On the other flip side, I think if you have the title or you're the lead on a project or a team, it's hard for other people necessarily to disagree with you sometimes, especially if you give your opinion first. You say, this is what I'm thinking as for the design, or this is what I think about the priorities. Some people don't want to disagree. They're uncomfortable confronting you, and groupthink takes over, right? So I think it's really important to coach the team and let other people talk first, let other people share their ideas first. Step in at the end if you strongly disagree, but like Bert said, know when to let go, know when it's good enough. It's not the way I would have done it, but it still works. It's good enough.
I think your mic is having some challenges, Matthew. I was just hearing, I heard garbled when you were trying to speak.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Do we want to have Nelson go and then Diana until Matthew fixes his audio?
Yeah, sure. We can step in while Matt figures out his mic. I was going to say, I've seen both of these. I think I've struggled a lot more with in part just due to the organization I worked in, with sort of not having as much trust for my opinion as I wanted or felt merited. But I think one big lesson I think is that if you don't have the trust or the influence you want, often you need to start by sort of stepping back, scoping more narrowly, and doing more of the work yourself. Is sort of, you need to just pick a project and jump in and do a bunch of execution work and sort of do good, like, object level work rather than org level prioritization, setting, strategizing, and sort of prove your worth in some way. I think that there's a balance here. I think a lot of it is very specific to the organization and maybe that's the other part is you have to figure out what your organization trusts, or what the teams or people around you trust. Some organizations, just temperamentally or due to the personalities or structure, put a lot of weight in titles. Some of them put a lot of weight in prior experience. Some of them kind of trust people only by their accomplishments at this present company. Have you shipped impressive features, or have you fixed concrete problems at this company? If you haven't, I don't care what your title is or what your background is. And so you have to figure out what is it that your organization trusts and how to get it. And I think, as Polina says, in the last resort, if you think the organization is like trusting the wrong things, doesn't want to give you respect, and sort of no way to get that, sometimes it means you need to find a different role or a different company if there's no path to it. And I think on the other side of people trusting your opinion too much, or sort of waiting for you on all decisions, I think as you get more senior and build that authority, being very explicit about delegation or about which things you're not going to involve yourself in becomes really important and powerful, and kind of explicitly say such and such person or such and such team is in charge of this thing, and I'm going to stay out of it. I'm not going to step in. And then in general, just becoming more careful with your words and where you choose to comment. It can be tempting to kind of offer an opinion on everything or jump in and be like, this is exactly what I think about all of this system. But if people are going to take your words sort of very seriously, you need to pause and think about, like, all right, I'll only comment if I think it's really important or really adds value, and kind of otherwise I'll let these processes play their course. I'll step in if I think they're catastrophically off course or really missing something, or if it's one of the sort of small number of projects that I've decided is really my focus. But otherwise, I'm going to deliberately make the choice to step back a little bit.
How's my mic? Any better? Cool. Go ahead, Diana.
Also, from my side, first, like, Paulina's answer really resonated with me too. Like, I fully found myself in your answer too. Like, also earlier in my career, definitely was more struggling and figuring out how you can build that trust. And some things that I usually advise people and like tell them, like, hey, these are some things that works for me. is learn what your leadership or people that you're trying to influence cares about. Like, do they have any goals that they care about? What's your org vision? Like, learn what those things are and frame your points relative to those things. Take advantage of time and go to office hours. Again, if those people have it, like get one-on-ones, get up. Maybe sometimes if those people are way senior than you, it might be uncomfortable. But if you're if you put in the time and get prepared for those one-on-ones, you can really have really great conversations with people, and they're also more than welcome to learn and listen. On the other side of like of the boat, when you're kind of like, okay, now I'm in the room and like people are waiting for my opinion since I'm more senior or so on. One thing that I found important is like having self-awareness in those meetings, like being mindful of like, if you're a very senior person in that room, most likely all the juniors will kind of try to wait for your opinion before they would have the courage to say something. So kind of ask yourself, are you the one talking the most there? How are you talking there? Are you probing for ideas? Do you ask mostly questions? Like, you should lead people to find their answers. You want to create space for other voices in those meetings. Just don't be that person in the room that tells people what to do. Kind of those are some things from my side.
Got it. So let's move on to the next question. I'm curious about all of your processes for getting buy-in to a project. What advice would you give senior ICs who feel blocked from making progress because their management counterparts are not aligned with them? Go ahead, Nelson.
Yeah, I think I have kind of maybe two takes here, two reactions. I think one is that personal relationships with counterparts in management, or having an ally who is somewhere in the relevant management chain or relevant kind of position of explicit authority, that you have a good relationship with, that you have some amount of personal trust with, that can be an ally, is often sort of, I think in some ways sadly, but kind of often the only way things get done is sort of having a couple of personal connections of people that you know and influence, and that sort of trust your opinion and can kind of take your opinion and present it in the official planning venues or in the official, those sort of more formal channels of authority. I think the other thing I'd say is, echoing something Diana just said, is figure out what management values, what is important to them. Do they care about, are they really worried about stability right now? Are they really worried about selling into a new customer vertical and there's some set of features that are really important there? And figure out a way to connect whatever it is you care about with whatever it is they care about, of this architecture project or this rewrite will contribute to their goals. Or maybe they're right. Maybe the project that you believe in or the things that you believe in are important, but now isn't the right time for them because they don't line up with company priorities. If you're trying and failing to convince people or influence people or push in your direction, you have to consider the possibility that maybe now is not the right time for whatever it is you're pushing for, or maybe you need to rephrase it. If that's sort of the conclusion every time, then you need to consider whether this is the right role or whether you sort of want to try something at a higher level. But try to be empathetic and understand what it is that they value, and either connect the things that you value to the things they value, or maybe try something else for the moment.
Diana?
Cool. I'll be fast on my side. So basically, it reiterated a part on coming with clear data on how certain project will improve those metrics or things that the leadership or management side cares about. It's super important. And circling back to the trust and the relationship, I think it's really important to try to build those things way ahead of time before you start working on projects. So then you have those relationships and trust built. So then it's easier to have those conversations. And kind of lastly, focusing on the why question. Why are we wanting to build this? Why am I blocked on this thing? Like, the why question would usually help on like debugging the situation.
Paulina?
Yeah, I totally agree with most of what's been said. I mean, there's so many projects, right? You kind of have to read the room and see, which ones are going to be easiest to get buy-in for. There's too many projects going on all the time. There's too much work to do to spend all that time fighting with management about it. So find something that you can agree on. I usually start by asking, like, what's your number one priority right now? What's your number two priority right now? What's the thing you wish was solved already? Just kind of feel out like where the buy-in is going to come naturally because you're already aligned. And I might not be interested in working on their number one or the number two thing, but maybe their number three thing is the thing that really resonates with me, right? As was already mentioned, timing is so important, right? Not everything's worth fighting for at the moment. Come back to it in 6 months. And I think also something I would add is figure out what information that person would need in order to support that decision or that project, right? Like if I come to you with this insight or this metric or whatever, is that going to change your mind? And sometimes you need to know from them, like, what is that metric that would change their mind? So it's useful to help or to ask up front.
Okay, let's move on to the next question. When you transition to a new role within a company, or if you switch companies, you often leave behind some or all of the social capital and credibility that you've built up. Do you have any tips on making that type of transition and reestablishing your influence?
Bert, do you wanna?
I don't know if you can see my hand over the background.
Yeah, I think it like blends into the background. That's a good point. So yeah, go for it.
This one's super hard, I think. The only advice that I have is I think you really have to nail your first project when you join a company. Like often they don't really know what your capabilities are. And so sometimes they'll give you like a softball project, but you kind of have to take that as seriously as any other project that has the same, that has like more gravitas or has more importance to the company. And sometimes you get unlucky and you join a project that's just a train wreck and you kind of have to like guide that back to where you think it should be. So yeah, that's my small contribution to this question.
I will look extra hard to see the hand in the corner next time of your background. Diana, go ahead.
So from my side, I have a bit of a different take and mostly focusing like when you join a new company. I think when you're more senior and thinking here about StaffPlus, I think it's really important at the beginning to spend time to understand what are the expectations of your role in that new environment, because it's very different in different orgs, in different companies. And I think also in many cases to properly execute at the level of a StaffPlus, it takes time at the beginning because you need to develop the relationships. You need to spend the time to understand the environment. So maybe sometimes that might not be intuitive. It's not like you join a team and in the first month you're already operating at a level. It takes a little bit of time to ramp up. And another aspect, I think, especially when you're joining a new org or a new team, you're coming with fresh eyes into that new environment. And because you have some experience, you can easily spot some areas that maybe are very fast to bring productivity and up level the team, or like maybe improves the services. You can maybe, oh, there's no metrics on availability and figure out how the service is working. Maybe that's something, or like, oh, build time takes so much time. Maybe we can have everyone, development focus be faster or something. Like there's for sure some projects that are very low amount of work that you can do and have huge impact in that initial time. And that will help on building that trust.
Nelson?
Yeah, I think the last thing Diana said really resonates with me is find places where you can get quick wins when you come in, and you can. And I think sort of as Bert said, you have to knock a project out of the park was how he put it, but I would put it sort of you have to demonstrate with like some sort of concrete delivery, whether that's shipping a new feature, whether that's fixing some process or system that rapidly kind of increases team productivity or team happiness. Find some wins that you can, some very concrete wins that you can deliver is really valuable in building credibility. And then I think also in line with what Diana said about it taking time to come up to sort of full performance at StaffPlus or whatever, you have to approach a new role with the expectation it'll take some time and sort of come in with humility and curiosity about what is this team? How is this team different? If I'm a senior person, I'll probably come in with a lot of strong opinions of this process that we're using to do deploys, like, seems absolutely batshit to me. Why are we doing that? And you have to temper that and say, okay, this seems batshit to me, but my job is to understand why it works this way, what the upsides are, why we haven't changed it. And I have to have that curiosity and build the understanding of what is actually going on here and why that's way. And I might be right that it's batshit and I can improve it. But if I am, I have to sort of demonstrate that by running the project that improves it or finding the quick wins to improve it. Definitely not by coming in and just sort of telling everyone that I meet of like, it sort of seems like we're doing something obviously wrong. Like, have we considered not doing that? That's a great way to tank your reputation. I think that approaching it with curiosity is a lens I really like of okay, why is the system like that? What are the upsides that we're getting out of this, if any? How is this system different from systems that I've worked on in the past, such that maybe the kind of constraints are different or there are concerns that I'm not used to thinking about? And then kind of once you understand those, hopefully you're better equipped to present your pitch of, I think we should change the deploy process in this way because of the following pain points that I've seen us go through, and really ground it in the details of the new team rather than in your past experience or your sort of high level heuristics or gut instincts.
Yeah, I agree. I think it takes a lot of discipline when you go into a new team, you can look at something and say like, yeah, that looks batshit, like you said. I think it takes discipline to say, maybe I'm the one that's batshit. And this was a totally normal decision in the context of this team. So I think that was a really good point. Okay, let's move on to the next.
I just want kind of one quick response to that is another reason that I like looking for quick wins is that they actually serve as sort of spot checks to yourself that you're calibrated, right? If you look at a system and you're like, this system looks horrible, if you're right that it's horrible, there should be hopefully some way for you to make, even if it's an incremental improvement that sort of pulls it a little bit towards better, then like hopefully that there's sort of, if you can make those quick wins, then sort of you're validating that the thing you're seeing has some truth. And if you fail to find any quick wins at all, then that's a good point for you to calibrate yourself of maybe I don't have as good a handle of what's going on here as I thought I did.
I also want to add something on the quick wins. Yeah, usually those are on the things and the areas that nobody wants to do it. It's like the ugly work that's not fun. It's not exciting for like any engineer to do. Usually those are there and they're very, very low amount of time. Like they're usually very straightforward to do, but nobody wants to do them and they're not fun.
Yeah, to build on that, I like to come in and do the tech debt tickets that nobody knows or wants to touch. And then team is usually grateful because you're gaining all this context, you're learning about how it works, you're knocking out some of the tech debt. They're like, oh, we like you. So that's usually a good first impression.
Yeah, that's a good segue into our next question. I once worked on a team where we got a new architect, and the architect came in and he embedded in our team and he said, give me something to do. And so someone on the team jokingly said, you can write some unit tests. We don't have good enough tests. And he said, okay. And he went and did it. And that architect forever earned our respect and trust by doing that. But our next question is about architects. And it's about how do you overcome or fix the poor reputation of software architects in our industry? And to qualify that a little bit, I think, at least in my experience in my career, a lot of architects are seen as being disconnected from the practical reality of the day-to-day engineering work. And that lends to having a poor reputation. Paulina, go for it.
So I think the out of touch part of it is a big part of it. I think there's 3 other parts that I've identified thinking about this. I think there's a certain tension that comes with giving away agency or control. I think that's like one of the things that, if you have an architect, this person's making architectural decisions, they might be in a higher scope or a higher level than you. You're ultimately giving them some control over the system you're designing. So I think there's some tension that comes from that. The accessibility piece, which you kind of mentioned, it's out of touch. It's seen as gatekeeping. They're not seen as hands-on necessarily. They're not involved in the day-to-day work occasionally. The third thing I would say is sometimes it's perceived a little waterfall-y. There's a lot of connotation of like, oh, if I go to the architect, it's just going to slow me down. Like, let me just build this real quick and be done with it. And I think the fourth one is they have a perception of saying no to new things. So I'll try to get those answers, like my tips on tackling each one of those really quickly. So I think with the control thing, I think you have to give people control over the things where you can. I think you let people inform the process and best practices. I think we talked about this in some of the other answers. You got to get that buy-in as you go along, right? So you can't just come in and say, this is how you're going to do it now without any of the context. And I think saying that you're not doing it this way for a good reason, and we're prioritizing system stability, for example, or we want to have long-term maintainability, sharing that context and the trade-offs help build that trust. So they're okay giving you that control because they understand that it's in the greater, bigger picture's interest. In terms of accessibility and feeling like architects are out of touch, I think what helps with this is having skin in the game, right? I think having the architect be embedded in a team, I think having the architecture role be, the team lead or, staff plus engineers across the company without the actual titles, I think helps a lot because then they are perceived as people with hands-on experience. I think you can't really lead from the back, right? You can't come in at like the 11th hour of a project and say, oh, you're not allowed to deploy this. I think that's like the wrong way to go about it. And I think that's where a lot of these, the reputation might come from. At some point we decided we're all DevOps, right? Like we all have to do DevOps work. I think it's at this point, we're all architects too, right? Whether we have the title or not, you got to be in the room. For the slowing down perception, I think like I take a lot of issue with people say, oh, it's going to slow me down, because it's like, what's your baseline? I want to help you build something that's going to ultimately work better. It's going to help you go faster. It's going to have fewer bugs. It's going to take into consideration things you probably haven't thought about yet. If that's going to slow you down during the design phase, or it's going to slow you down to wait a few days while people read your spec, like I think those are problems worth tackling of where this perception of slowing down comes from and whether or not it's actually slow. And I think there's certain projects you don't need this, right? It's too much. There's too much overhead and it will slow you down, and you just want to put a prototype out real fast. I think that's the time to do that, right? I think faster is fine. If that's your requirement, is you need to go fast, tell your architect this is the requirement up front and work around that. And then as for the last one about the perception that architects say no, I mean, again, I think there's a time and a place for experimenting and prototyping. I think that's really appropriate. I think you need to understand where the no is going to come from, right? You should be prepared to defend against the no. You should, if you get a no and it's a legit no, and other people also think it's a no, then you should be able to accept that and move on if it makes sense, right? Given constraints of the system. But I think if the thing needs to run in production and it's critical, it needs to be structured, right? And people who have vetted the design and thought about the overall architecture and the integration points are worth listening to. So I think that's how we start to repair the roles of the architects. We get them more involved from the beginning. We tell them and we share context really with them, and then we build trust.
I appreciate that very thorough answer. Let's see. Go ahead, Bert.
I was going to say, I feel like one very long-term fix is that we just need to change the diversity of software engineers. And like, if you think about the software architects that you've met in your career, they all kind of fit a certain mold for the most part. Like you see a certain mentality that sometimes it just doesn't align with the way that people think about things, or people don't feel like they can make a connection there. And so I think like if we focus our work on diversity and inclusion, eventually those people will become more senior and more senior until they become the architects that we want to have, I guess, in place.
Diana?
The other thing that I would add is also all about attitude and how you're making other people feel. Like you want to build empathy, and you want to like, basically, if you're an architect, your success is other people's success. So it's like, how do we make other people feel like we're in this together, and like we're not, I'm like, there's not this person that comes in and it's like this person has all the control and makes all the rules. So it comes of like, yeah, to me it comes, how do you make other people feel? And attitude is important. And I think in like the older style, I think where kind of the poor reputation comes from is from this.
Go ahead, Paulina.
I have a quick story on this one as well. Like we follow an RFC process and an architecture review process. It's pretty structured here at Squarespace, and occasionally we'll get an RFC go through this that people have really strong feelings about, that the design could be done differently, right? And we can take that as like, oh no, I can't believe this thing is being shot down. But I think, to Diana's point, like the attitude you go about it and you go, hey, we're in this together. We all have to support this thing long term. We all have a vested interest in building the best thing we can. And we want to see this project succeed. So if we work together and come up with improvements to that design, improvements to the architecture, and get that buy-in from the people that are doing the design, that like these people are here to help, and they're not just saying no and then moving back to do the rest of their work, right? They're invested and they're part of the team that's going to make this thing better. I think that works really well, and I've seen that happen a few times here so far, where we don't like the original design and we go back, and in a week or so we have a much better design that a lot more people feel happy about, and that's what gets implemented. And I think the alternative world is where you kind of go with like the half-baked design, and then you kind of grumble about it later. And then 5 years later, someone goes, why did they build it this way? This doesn't make any sense, right? And all that could have been avoided if you do that work up front. But the attitude is the most important part about whether this process is going to succeed or not, because it can go either way. When you have a disagreement, like it's hard. You gotta solve that.
Go ahead, Diana.
That's a great point. And like something to add a bit on that is like kind of bringing a bit back like the theme of the self-awareness. Like if you're an engineer, you have your own biases on how certain things should be done. And I think it's important to catch yourself and be like, hey, am I really, I don't know, shutting this down or being very opinionated about this thing because I want it this way, or is it because like it is actually going to help? Like, don't dismiss other people's opinion and try to be aware of your own biases in the technical direction.
So let's get adventurous and take a few audience questions. So the first one is for you, Paulina. You had mentioned strategy writing, I think, as an answer to one of the first questions. How do you go about that, and do you have an example?
Great question. So I think when I joined Squarespace, I was on the data team when it was just like a group of people. We all had stand-ups together. It was like a very small team. Now we've got like 8 data teams, I think, that are all that size of the original data team that I joined. So, at some point you need a strategy is my point. Like, you don't need one necessarily right away, and you can go for a long time without one. But I started asking the question of like, what is the point? What are we trying to do? Like, what is the vision? What is the strategy here? And the more times I asked that question and got frustrated with the lack of an answer, somebody threw it back at me and said, well, why don't you write one? If you're the one that needs this so bad, like go write it. You've got thoughts about this stuff, right? So I kind of started to draft one, and then as a company, we decided to kind of invest more into strategy writing across all of our different engineering teams, starting earlier this year. So now we have a bunch of strategies that are in progress, and we've been sharing both like strategy writing process and getting the buy-in for the strategies, getting reviews for the strategies, figuring out what are the overlapping parts of different strategies for different parts of the organization. What should the scope of the strategy be? Like, should it be time boxed to like the next year? Should it be longer than that? So I think we're still pretty early on our journey as a company on strategy writing, but I'm still all in for, if you have good ideas and you want to present them to people, try to write them down, whether that's an RFC or whether that's a strategy, depends on the scope of what you're trying to solve. So anyway, to answer that question, like, we do kind of have examples of this, but I don't think we're sharing them publicly, but there's plenty of literature on this. A book that keeps getting cited is Bad Strategy, Good Strategy, or Good Strategy, Bad Strategy.
So go ahead, Diana.
Just wanted to add that I also wanted to mention the Good Strategy, Bad Strategy book. And I also have seen Will Larson has a blog post and he has a pretty good article there about engineering strategy. I'll kind of post it in the chat, but that can also be a good starting point for things that I've seen written online.
So let's go to the next audience question, which is how to actually influence someone in a remote working environment. I got the impression that people are most influenced by someone who they know in person or even have a personal relationship with. But in a remote environment, we don't have a chance to create such a relationship.
I can go.
Yeah, go ahead. Oh, sorry. I couldn't see your hand, but go for it.
I would say, like, we've been in this pandemic for a while now, and I kind of disagree with the premise that you cannot create a relationship remotely. Like my boss, like I literally met her in person for the first time like last week, but she's been my boss for like over a year. You can do it over Zoom. Like I think scheduling regular one-on-ones with people. At our company, we have this Slack app called Donut, which just pairs random people like once a week to meet. So you could do that like across your team, across a certain area of work or engineering. And I think that that's a great way to kind of get to know people that are outside of your regular sphere of influence. And I think it's like important that you take the time to just connect on a personal level. So dedicating a certain amount of time in the beginning of your meetings for just, shooting the shit and talking about your life outside of work is important. Like I sometimes forget that as well.
Go ahead, Nelson.
Yeah, I think Bert actually covered most of what I was going to say, but I think I agree with the premise that it's harder to develop relationships in a remote environment, but it's not impossible. And I think the big thing is you have to be a lot more deliberate about it than when you're in person. There's often a lot of opportunities to go for a walk and grab coffee with someone. You meet people around the lunch table, and you have to just be pretty deliberate about replacing those, but scheduling virtual lunches where you just eat your lunch on the opposite side of a camera and chat about whatever, or virtual coffees that don't have an agenda and is just a get to know you. I think running recurring one-on-ones with people that you work closely with are super great. You can even in some working relationships remotely, you can have a separate weekly, here's our work one-on-one where we're going to talk specifically about what we're working on. And then also on Thursdays, we get together for half an hour and just chat about whatever's top of mind, and don't try to specifically focus it to work. Is that you can build these relationships, but you have to be a lot more deliberate about it, and sort of it can seem like it's taking a lot more time, but often that's time that sort of at work you wouldn't have been working all of the 8 hours you were in the office. You'd be stepping out for coffee or chit-chatting in the hallways, and you have to block that time off in a little more structured way when you're just on the other side of a Zoom link or a Slack link.
Diana?
Also looking at things a bit from a different perspective. Now with more people working remote and being on Zoom, it actually evens the field for everyone. Like, especially if you're in a company that has offices in other places. Like before the pandemic, it was really hard for those satellite offices to get and have time with people. But now with Zoom and remote, everyone is more of an even field. So actually everyone would need to be more proactive and reaching out and try to build those relationships. But on a good side, everyone has to do it.
And with that, I think, unfortunately, we're out of time. So hopefully we're all now inspired to use our influence to build great products and make our companies enjoyable places to work for everyone. So let's continue the conversation on Slack. So please head over there, ask us questions. We will start answering them as soon as we can. So thanks again to all the panelists for sharing all your experience and thoughts with us. We definitely appreciate it. And thanks to all the viewers for spending some time with us today. Have a good day, everyone. Thank you.